Welcome to By Faith with Frank Shelton. Frank speaks at the schoolhouse, the church house, and has even been interviewed at the White House, but is most grateful to speak life into your house. Now, here's Frank Shelton.
Frank Shelton worked 2 decades on Capitol Hill and left by faith to preach the gospel in 2007. His family worked over 150 years in Washington protecting presidents and serving the congressional community. His ancestor carried President Abraham Lincoln from Ford's Theater, and his maternal ancestor hand-planted the cherry blossoms. Very few have as deep roots in D.C. Urgency is one minister's journey leading up to the lockdown in March 2020. Buckle up. This book is a game changer for some and life changer for others. Available now at Amazon stores worldwide. For an autographed copy, visit frankshelton.com.
Yeah, well, this is where it's going to get wild. So first of all, I noticed that some of the churches that were closed during the pandemic finally opened to be vaccination centers. And I know it's a personal decision. It is a political, polarizing topic. I'll give you 2 quick answers. Number 1, the reason I'd lean towards salvation is greater than vaccination. Everybody was just basically screaming, trust the science and take the vaccine. And in my spirit, I felt like that was fingernails on a chalkboard. I know God has used and raised people to give us medicine. But I also know I did some investigating, and when some of the scientists who publicly didn't even believe in a savior who created science, the Lord told me to pause. And if you were to crack the Bible dead open, it's 38,000 chapters. 38,000 verses. But the dead center of the Bible is Psalm 118:8. And it is the scripture, a sermon, and a sentence. If it was a fortune cookie and pulled it out, the dead center of the Bible is Psalm 118:8. Better to put your trust in God than put your trust in man. And the reason I said salvation is greater than vaccination, there are some folks who fail to realize we already have a disease. And it's not HIV, it's not AIDS, it's not COVID-19, it's called sin, S-I-N. And our sin separates us from a holy God. And some folks would probably think if I just get vaccination, I'm good in this life, and maybe naively thinking in the next life. And so if your personal preference leads you to get a vaccine, I'm telling you, if you get vaccinated without salvation, you're still missing it. And that's why we need to really look at the eternal, not the temporal. Well, I don't know if you remember Kenny Rogers. Right before he passed, I was able to take my wife to see him in concert. I found out she loved Kenny Rogers. She grew up in El Salvador. They had a little radio. They could get one American station, and she heard Kenny Rogers as a kid. So it was neat to finally get a chance to take her to see him in person. But he had a lot of good hits, but one of them was called Coward of the County. And if you remember the last line of those lyrics, this guy who had always been teased, mocked, made fun of, just no backbone, he walks in and a couple bullies were teasing his would-be girlfriend, and he started to leave, and they laughed once again, oh, he's yellow, and he did something that they weren't expecting. He locked the door and then walked back and knocked them all out. And in high school, I was voted nicest in high school, but I was also one time getting an award for the nicest in the county. But when the pandemic hit, I felt like the Lord said, niceness is not weakness. And the nicest in the county, looking back, stepped up his game and became one of the boldest in the country. I didn't pick this assignment. I didn't pick this fight. I didn't pick this war. But you got to keep in mind, when your family comes from a long line of detectives, but even greater, protecting people, protecting presidents, I had to stand up when others were sitting out. I was able to do some detecting of my own, piece of the puzzle together, and we're not out to hurt anyone. But here's the thing, if I could go speak at times with a communist president, or fly to Africa and speak to these crowds at Mandela Stadium, and I never mentioned it until in the book, I actually got really sick for 9 months. My liver was attacked and nobody knew it. I knew it, but I didn't want to look like I was blaming Africa for getting me sick. I'm not even anti-vax. I'm just everything against this particular. And then to find out this COVID vaccine isn't even a vaccine. So when I talk about standing up and standing strong, when 10 of my 12 countries were canceled in 2020, I lived by faith. Pastors were still getting a paycheck, whether they had a crowd or not. Whether they were in person or on Zoom, they were getting paid. And I've never been in it for the money, but there was no money. And a running back will always look for a way in. A fireman will look for a way in. An evangelist looks for a way in. And the Lord told me in the last days he was going to use two things. A lot of evangelists to stand up when, to be frank, some pastors, bless their heart, sat out. Not all of them, but too many of them. And he also said, I'm going to use a bunch of unknowns to make my name known in the bottom of the ninth. And that's what he did. And I would get in my car and I would just drive. And I mean, we went to California twice. Now I flew there, but I'm driving to Tampa. I'm speaking in Georgia. I'm in North Carolina, South Carolina, Richmond, Virginia, Danbury, Connecticut, New York City. We're in Ohio. We're in Dallas, Texas. Going hard, just looking for a way in, sounding the alarm, lifting up Jesus, preaching the word. And there was one time in the middle of that lockdown season, draconian overreach, tyrannical laws, politicians saying one thing and not doing what they tell us. And there were times I already had one pastor friend arrested. I got another guy the next month threatened to be arrested in New Mexico. And then I'm going to preach, and every time I'm at a red light, I'm looking in the rearview mirror to see if today's the day that Frank Shelton gets arrested for preaching the gospel. And this is not the America I know. This is not the America I love. This is not the America I grew up in. But I will tell you this, Jensen Franklin said it best. Christianity can survive without America, but America cannot survive without Christianity. So we need an all hands on deck, and he wants to use all of us. And I just was standing up when a lot set out. And in closing, Patrick Henry said, give me liberty or give me death. And then I found out all my friends just wanted to sit out and just wait for another check from the government. Reagan said the scariest 9 words ever thrown together is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Today I ate at Cracker Barrel in Atlanta, Georgia, and the guy tells me we've been open, but we can't even get our hired help to come back. They're just used to just being lazy and getting a check. Now, I don't think that's an indictment on a race. It's not an indictment on a age group. It's an indictment of what the pandemic, trying to push a communist agenda to America. And Jesus said, the Bible says that if you want to earn a living, you got to do it by the sweat of your brow. So, you know, my parents, lazy is not in our name. I know the Lord is coming. I know the clock is ticking and time is almost out. So more than ever, we're taking a stand. You know, growing up in Capitol Hill and even on my street, the guy across the street's the Department of State. 2 doors down, the retired CIA. The guy at the end of the street is a detective with DC Police. Next to him does the hydraulics for Air Force One. To his left, husband and wife both work with the IRS. I mean, we have alphabet soup on my street. And it's great. There's some good, godly people still in the government, but there's also a dark, sinister side to our great government. And when it's not good, she's no longer great. Now, we expect the deep state to be disappointing. You know, it's not that God is driving the government's bus. And we live in a fallen world. You know, you look at the back of the iPhone of Apple, when it had the chunk out of it, I thought, Lord, are they making fun of the fall of Adam and Eve? And, you know, so the interesting thing is with the deep state is real. But what's more depressing to God and me is the deep sleep of the church. You know, Rip Van Winkle was the guy at known that slept forever underneath a tree. And lately, we have churches that are still closed. We have clergy who are clueless. And we have Christians who become callous. And we are asleep at the wheel. 9,000 churches the year before the pandemic didn't even baptize one person. Why? Because they're playing church. They're not the church. They don't even live up to John the Baptist, much less Jesus the Christ. And we resemble Rip Van Winkle more than the Redeemer. So yes, the deep state is a problem. When you use three-letter agencies to attack Christians, conservatives, citizens who are patriots as an attack dogs, that's not good, that's not American, and that doesn't honor God. But you can expect it because we're not home yet. But when Jesus said, before he was crucified, he said not once, not twice, 3 times to some of his disciples at Gethsemane, can you stay awake with me this 1 hour? And they struck out 3 times. And if a day is 1,000 years, is 1,000 years to a day. I've never heard anyone else say this, but in this season, I felt like the Lord was saying, this last year, Frank, can you stay awake? Will you serve me? Will you stay in the game? Will you give your all? When a lot of friends are not only asleep at the wheel, they're still asleep on the couch.
Why is that important to you?
Well, 2 things, short and sweet, and thank you, great question. Number 1, when Billy Graham, who pastored 13 U.S. presidents, 6 of which he didn't vote for, and what I love about Dr. Graham, we never figured out who the 6 were. But when a reporter asked him, are you after the right wing or the left wing? He said, I'm after the whole bird. Jesus loved everyone. And the other thought was, if my dad, counting, I think, 6 presidents with the U.S. Capitol Police and then protecting 2 during his tenure with the Justice Department, if Dad could protect 7, 8 U.S. presidents, if he could be willing to die for them, we need to be able to say hi to them, maybe even pray for them, polar opposite of us. And when God allowed to start opening doors, you know, when I hear people say the NCAA wins the national championship and we're going to the White House, and it would grieve me when I would hear them brag, well, he's not my president, so we're not going, and we're boycotting the White House. I personally feel like they may have just missed out on the greatest educational experience of their collegiate career. You just won professionally, but in love, you just failed personally. I heard people say it against Obama, it grieved me. I heard people say it against Trump, it grieved me. I personally think it grieves God more. Because if he's willing to die for them, we need to shine a light for him to them. Martin Luther King Jr. said it best, if you're invited to the White House and you turn it down, you just failed to shine a light. He said, quote, in 1960 before his assassination, God called you to be a thermostat, yes, a thermometer, no. A thermometer only tells you the temperature in the room. He said, as a Christian, you can be a thermostat. When you walk in the room, you can raise the room, lower the room, just by your personality in the room. And if you boycott it, arrogantly say, he's not my man, then you just kept God out of the room. Now, I know there's some theologians that think he is omnipresent, and he is. But God didn't just die to save you, he's dying to use you, and we are to be a billboard for God. And when you really look at our ministry, and I'm no Billy Graham, but on a minor league level, some of our best ministry moments were people who looked total different than me, politically, culturally, and I'll say it one more time, I wanted way more than one political party represented at my funeral. Paul was all things to all men to win some, and I'm just trying to go after whoever's in front of me.
taking whole teams into the mission field at one time.
We'd met in our youth group when I was 15 years old and fell in love crazy quickly and dated for 7.5 years. I went off to Bible college and came back and thought I cannot live another day without this guy in my life. He's my best friend, my soulmate, my everything. And we were married in the same church where we met, and 11 years of marriage and a few albums later, and he was managing me on the road full time, and we were in ministry together full time, and asked to go over to Jamaica on a mission trip. And it was really a time in my life where I just also wondered what's next. You know, like, what does God have next? Am I hearing God? Have I lost the voice? You know, is it my voice? You know, all those times when we get into those different places too, where we just start to question life. And I was just questioning a lot of things and wondering after 11 years if it was starting a family, you know, and he felt like it was. And so we were at that place in our lives, and in Jamaica was a pivotal trip to go there and just to kind of not have a bunch of people and voices in our head and just to listen to God. And we had one day off in between some things that were happening, and he wanted to go scuba diving, free diving in the legendary Blue Lagoon. And I'll never forget standing on the edge of the water, waving goodbye to him, thinking that I would just see him in moments. He would come back and we'd continue our day. I had no idea, standing on the edge of the water that afternoon, that I would say goodbye to him, wave goodbye to him in the water, and I would never see him again. Time went by, hours went by, the search began, and I stood on the edge of the water the entire time just weeping, scared, wondering, you know, even in that moment, like, what do I do? What do I do, God, with my life? Like, I knew everything was changing. I could feel it, and I didn't know how to change it. I couldn't change anything, and I felt numb, I felt shocked, you know, and the bottom line was that I knew that my life was going to change, but I also knew that God loved me. So even in the worst moment of my life, I could still feel the presence of God somehow just holding me in that grip. It didn't mean that I didn't feel numb and that I didn't have questions in the anger feeling of why me, and why am I having to go through this? Everything shifted in my life that next morning as the search began and continued for him through the night, finding nothing. The next morning I woke up to a home of two perfect strangers asking me to look at this television, and I remember walking into the room, staring at the television the morning of September 11th, 2001, as the second plane plowed into the Twin Towers in New York City, and I thought that this is probably the end of the world because none of it made sense to me. How could God be in something like this? And in my personal life and what was happening in America, I mean, all those questions that you have. And it was moments later that I got the call from the Blue Lagoon that they'd recovered the body of my husband, who had been hit on the back of the head taking his last breath, and he was knocked out and fell into the arms of Jesus. He was just gone. They were telling me he's gone. He's gone. And I remember falling to the ground myself, just crying, asking God to hold me, to capture me, to just love me in that moment where I just felt completely lost. And I think the one thing, I go back to that moment so many times of being numb and learning that even though I felt numb in that moment, and I felt numb in many moments, if I'm being honest, you know, I felt numb on the journey so many times. But I've learned that I can never interpret my numbness as God's absence in my life. So many times we can feel just absolutely numb about life, but it doesn't mean that God has removed himself from our lives. God is always there, and so that's been probably the biggest thing I've clung to in 13 years on this journey back to healing.
So we just got home last night to Northern California. We were met with ash and smoke, and it's kind of gross right now. But the highlight for me was opening all of the packages and the letters and the cards that people had sent me, not just for my birthday, but for our ministry. We opened them all. They're amazing. But this one stole the show. This was an award made specifically for me. Thank you so much for bringing praise in the midst of protest and revival in the face of riots. You're a world changer. Jesus over Antifa. It actually says that on there. That's amazing. I'm going to keep this for my children's children's children. Thank you, guys.
Frank Shelton worked 2 decades on Capitol Hill and left by faith to preach the gospel in 2007. His family worked over 150 years in Washington protecting presidents and serving the congressional community. His ancestor carried President Abraham Lincoln from Ford's Theater, and his maternal ancestor hand-planted the cherry blossoms. Very few have as deep roots in D.C. Urgency is one's minister's journey leading up to the lockdown in March 2020. Buckle up. This book is a game changer for some and life changer for others. Available now at Amazon stores worldwide. For an autographed copy, visit frankshelton.com.
The reason you mean a lot to me, meeting you right now, is on Sunday my pastor did a whole entire lesson on Rocky and faith. And I didn't know you were going to be here, and it happened on Sunday. So what I would like to ask you, because I heard an hour about his perception on Rocky and faith.
You're joking.
An hour. He loves you. He loves you.
There was a very concerted effort in the beginning of Rocky, because where he's fighting is called the Resurrection Fight Club. And when it comes down from the face of Jesus onto Rocky, you just know something is about to happen to this lost soul.
So my question with playing that character, what did that affect you with your own walk with faith? And man.
Well, it does. You know, there's a dichotomy. The Rocky character, I wish I could embrace that fully sometimes, because it's so ethical, it's so giving, it's so forgiving, and it's selfless. And then every now and then the ego comes into it, and so I'm constantly fighting this battle to get back to that. Let's put it this way: then you have the Rambo side, and that's before. You know, I always said that Rocky is after coffee, Rambo is before coffee in the morning.
I love that. Well, I don't want to be selfish. I said one question, and you were very generous. Thank you, sir.
$7.7 billion people call planet Earth home. Sadly, 152,000 people died today. 152,000 died yesterday. And 152,000 will die tomorrow. According to the CDC, 2.8 million people die annually in America alone. From America to Antarctica to Australia, most people have no clue where they will spend eternity. Opposed to sit on the sidelines, we elected to get in the game. Regardless of providing relief during natural disasters, distributing food and clothes to the poor, helping eradicate human sex trafficking nationally and globally, influencing influencers, motivating world-class athletes, investing in students at public and private school assemblies, ministering to powerful politicians, counseling heads of state, or preaching the gospel at citywide crusades at home or massive sports stadiums abroad. From coast to coast and around the globe, we exist to reach the lost at any cost. From London, England, Guatemala, the Bahamas, Jamaica, Mexico, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Romania, Paris, Philippines, Brazil, Africa, Tokyo, Pakistan,
India.
7.7 billion people call planet Earth home. Sadly, Earth is not our final destination. We have two options, heaven or hell, but not both. And hell is too long to be wrong. We're reaching the world one soul at a time. Time is ticking, people are hurting. And our mission is to offer hope to folks on Main Street to Wall Street. From our house to Hollywood. And schoolhouses, church houses, and even the White House. Time is ticking. People are hurting. But help is on the way.
If you would like to bring Frank to your next event or outreach, visit www.frankshelton.com.